You are tuned into LadyByrd Live. I am an activist and motivational speaker whose purpose is to spread the awareness of HIV. This podcast is about the education of HIV and AIDS and other STDs that people are afraid to discuss and address. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be educated. So, for this episode, I wanted to take you all back to the very beginning of my story. Everyone who is going to be listening to this podcast now and in the future, this is going to be here for you to be able to listen to be able to get questions answered that you're probably going to have questions about. So, if you stick it out with me through this episode, you're going to get your questions answered. So my story begins September 2003. September 2003, I was introduced to a man who at the time was just someone, wasn't a friend, wasn't anyone I knew prior to that moment. We were introduced by his mom. His mom basically said, "Hey, this is my son, this is his girlfriend. You never met him, blah, blah, blah." So I met him for the first time. It was at a family gathering for a Labor Day barbecue. And so at that point, over the course of whatever time frame, we became friends, um, and always stayed in constant communication. Over the 2 years of us just only being friends, of course, I knew other people, people he had dated, things like that. It wasn't like we were in a relationship, we were dating, we never flirted, nothing like that until about 2 years later of us meeting. So 2 years later, we start dating. We're in a serious relationship. At the time, he's living in South Carolina. I'm in Florida. His mom's here in Florida. And so he visits frequently. So as he's visiting her, he's visiting me. Sometimes he only comes and visits me, or sometimes he may only come in as a visit to his mom. But that was what we were doing at the moment. So fast forward to um, about a year later, a year and a half later, we start having a conversation. All right, so we are, long distance back and forth. What are we doing? He had been married previously once before. I had never been married, but I did have a daughter at the time. And we just started having the discussion of um, marriage. And it was a discussion of marriage where we were just saying, is this what we want to do? You've never been married. How do you feel about it? I've been married once. If I get married again, that's going to be it for me. That was the conversation he and I were having. And so we decided that we wanted to get married. There was no formal proposal. He did not get down on one knee. It was just us having that conversation and coming to that mutual agreement and understanding. So fast forward, December 2006, I relocate to South Carolina where he's living. And we made that decision based on a few factors. It wasn't just, oh, well, I'm going to come there. It was based on a lot of things at the time. He had been working on the job that he had been on for about 4 years, going on 5 years. I was a college student, and it just made more sense. Although I was working, it just made more sense with him having a more stable job and, more of the stability than I had in regards to, employment, finances, things like that. We made a choice I would relocate there. So I relocated there and enrolled in school, started working a job, and, we were living together, learning each other, and everything. And so it became a point where usually every summer I would go and get tested for HIV. I would go and get tested for HIV mainly because I was a phlebotomist and a medical assistant. I would frequently do blood draws, and at any given point, you never know, you can be stuck by a needle. My tolerance for pain is very high, so had I ever gotten stuck by a needle, I probably would never have known because I don't feel that much pain. It has to be literally excruciating pain for me to feel it. And so I said, let's go ahead and just set up an appointment at your primary care physician. We can do it there. We don't have to go to a clinic. And that way I can also establish myself as a patient at this office. So we go to this office. We request the testing and everything to be done. At this point, this is 2007. 2007, there was no such thing as a quick test. You went in, you got your blood draw, you did 2 weeks of waiting, and then you came back and you got your results. So it was time for us to come back in and get our results. And again, when we got tested, I was in one room getting tested, he was in the other room. And that's not for anything specific. That happens all the time. You're going to have your privacy while you're getting tested, because also along with testing, they ask you other questions as well as a part of the testing to figure out your risk factors of different things. And so we come back. We agreed that when we got our results back, we would get our results individually and come together in front of the doctor, and we would tell each other our results. Nothing unusual about that. I trusted him. He trusted me. We're getting married. Why not be able to share this information with each other sitting in front of the doctor? Well, we get in front of the doctor. I let him know my test results are negative. He tells me his test results are negative. And that's what we both had an understanding of. So now we move forward. Our wedding date was set for August 4th, 2007. Here it is the week prior to that date. We arrived to Florida for our wedding. We got married in Florida. And we get to his mother's house. And now keep in mind, his mother, I had not just only met her once or twice. His mother was someone who I knew this literally before I knew him. So as I was still living in Florida, when we were just dating back and forth, he and his mother and I, we would go, his mother and I, we would go eat lunch, dinner, breakfast, whatever it is. I would go to her house. Um, when I went to pick out wedding dresses and do wedding stuff, she was right there. She wanted to be included in everything. So at any given point, what his mother told me the week prior to our wedding, she could have told me this at any given moment. But the week prior, leading up, literally, it's probably about 2 or 3 days prior to the wedding. We get to her house. She pulls me into her garage, and we're standing there, and she says to me, "Has he ever said anything to you about HIV?" And I'm looking at her. I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" Like, I'm asking her, "What are you talking about?" And she just says, "Well, just go and ask him about HIV." So my curiosity at that point, is peaking very high. And I'm the type of person where I am not going to, do any he say, she say. If you tell me to go ask someone and that person is readily available right there, I'm going to bring all three of us together and I'm going to ask you the question they want me to ask you in front of them. So there's no confusion. I'm not misunderstanding anything. And that's what I did. So I told her to stay right here. I went in the house and I asked him to come outside with me and his mom. I bring him outside. We stand in his mother's face. And I asked him in front of his mother, I said, "Your mom just told me that I need to ask you about HIV. What is she talking about?" He immediately says and looks at his mom, "I don't know what she's talking about. I don't know why she told you to ask me about HIV. I have no idea." His mom did not part her lips. She did not blink. She did not do anything. She did not even call him a liar. She just stood there and looked at me, looked at him, and did not part her mouth. So at that point, I did not understand her reason for asking me that question because, again, I asked him the question in front of her. He answered. She did not come back with any type of rebuttal. And so that told me, okay, whatever she's talking about, it's got to be nothing. And so that's what I took it as because, again, I'm still with this notion that he and I went and gotten tested. We told each other in front of the doctor that we were both negative. So that was what I knew. I knew nothing other than that. But I took the initiative to ask him the question in front of her so that any event he was lying, she would have said, "Well, why are you lying? You do know what I'm talking about. X, Y, and Z." That didn't happen. So August 4th, 2007, we get married. And it was the wedding that I had planned. You know, us as women, this is what we do. We're little girls. We talk about weddings. We talk about who we're going to have in our weddings. We talk about all these different things. That is what we do. We plan out, um, our future. We want the fairy tale type wedding. Everything that I have ever said that I wanted in a wedding, it happened. The church that I grew up in was where I got married. My best friend was my maid of honor. um, Everything was how I envisioned it, all the way down to the wedding song. My cousin sang in a group that had the most amazing wedding song, and I walked down the aisle, um, and my bridesmaids walked down the aisle to this song. So again, everything. So we get married. We had already discussed having a child together. I already had a child. He already had kids from previous relationship and marriage. So, I was okay with just having one more child. And so I found out the end of October 2007 that I was pregnant. I called the OBGYN. Hey, I'm pregnant. I'd like to make a new patient appointment. Make my appointment. We go in for the appointment. They do the history and physical, gather all that information, and they draw blood. This is typical. Okay. So as weeks go on, because I am pregnant, newly pregnant, women go through the, you know, the pregnancy things, the nausea, the vomiting, all of that stuff. And so I'm nauseous, I'm throwing up, can't keep anything down. I realized that I'm probably dehydrated. So I call my doctor and I say, listen, I can't keep food down. I'm very weak and I believe I'm dehydrated. What can you do for me? So she immediately had me come into the office. I went into the office and I get hooked up to IV fluids, and they also give me nausea medicine in these fluids. So I'm sitting in this room in this cold recliner chair. He's sitting in there with me, and the doctor comes in, and the doctor says, "Well, is it okay if I speak to you alone, and we'll bring your husband back in afterwards?" Okay, sure, no problem. So he steps out of the room. She comes back in and she says to me, well, I have your labs back and everything's okay except one thing. And I had gestational diabetes with my oldest daughter. So my first thought is, okay, she's going to tell me, my blood sugar is high and I need to probably do insulin while I'm pregnant, only eat certain things. This is what I'm expecting. She's like, no, actually, your glucose looks fine. So I'm like, okay, well, what could be wrong? And she's giving me this look like I need to tell her this, but I don't know how to tell her. So it becomes a thing of her just coming out and saying, well, your labs came back and it says that you're HIV positive. And she's still saying all this stuff, but I didn't hear anything she said. I completely zoned out. I became numb. I became paralyzed in thought, in motion, in everything about me. I was stuck and I was numb and I was staring at this wall. And as I'm staring at this wall, she's still talking. Again, everything's blurred out. The sound is faded. I hear nothing. And she says, well, do you want me to bring your husband back in? And do you want me to tell him or do you want to tell him? I said, well, you can bring him back in and you tell him. Because if you're telling me that I'm HIV positive, then he's the reason why, and, she's not really understanding why I'm saying this. But for me, everything played back in my head. The conversation with his mom played back. Other little things, um, you know, it's just almost like that story that plays and then it gets to the end and it rewinds. It was like the story of my life did this whole rewind and reverse. We were at this moment in literal um, marital bliss, newlyweds, newly, pregnant, and all of a sudden somebody just hit pause and rewind on life. That's what took place and that's what happened. And so we get to this point and I say, you tell him. And so he comes in, she tells him. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't, you know, any type of any shock anywhere. And he says to her, well, we'll get through this. We'll work this out. That was my first, Red flag of, okay, he knows. And then we get in the car, and as we're getting in the car, before we even pull off, he says, "Don't tell anybody." Red flag number two. What do you mean, don't tell anybody? And again, he's still with this whole thing of, we'll get through this, we'll work this out, blah, 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 blah. And for the first couple of weeks, I did not tell anybody because I was still processing it. I still couldn't understand how could someone who not only says that they love you and care about you, but also someone who takes these vows, you know, in front of so many people, not only in front of God, but in front of so many people, they take these vows to only be holding a secret and something so devastating. And so I broke down and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I was driving to work one night and I was working a third shift job. I'm driving to work and I'm just break down and I cry and I call my mom and I just start telling her everything and just telling her everything and just apologize for not telling her sooner. And I just made the choice. I said, you know what? I'm going to come to Florida for this month of December. At this point, it's December. I'm just going to come get some time away. I need time away. I need time to process things. I explained to him, listen, I just need to get away. I need to be able to process stuff. And so I leave. I don't return until December 27th, 2 days after Christmas. And at that point, because I had been through all of these emotions, when I say every emotion I had been through, I went through them. And so it got to a point where I said, you know what? When I go back, I just want to go back, get all my stuff, and I want to leave. But I knew because he didn't want me to leave, I knew that I was going to have to leave at the right time. He was off work from vacation and for Christmas vacation. So I knew that he went back to work New Year's Day, January 1st, 2008. Now, when I came back those 2 days after Christmas, I knew that there was nothing really in the house to eat because I was the one who would go to the grocery store and get the food and groceries. And, I was the homemaker, so to speak. Even though I was in college and I was working and I was doing this, I was still the one that did everything else as well. And so we go get in the car and we go to the store. I'm driving, he's in the passenger seat. And I'm the type of person, usually when I'm driving, I see the funniest stuff and I just laugh because I see it and it's funny. So we're in a car and we're driving and I just literally burst out laughing. And he looks over me, he looks around like, well, what you laughing at? I say, oh, I just thought of a new way to kill you today. And he kind of gave me this look like, what? And he kind of leaned over to the car. They're like, she crazy. Yeah, you're right. Because at that point, when I got to that point, mentally, I was at a point of rage. I was at a point of rage. I could have done anything. Thankfully, I was able to have rational thoughts. I knew I didn't want to go to jail. I'm not equipped for jail. I'll go in jail. I'm not going to shower. I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to touch nothing. I'm just going to just be, it's just going to be whatever it is, you know. And so I said, you know what? Yeah, I gotta go and I gotta leave. I gotta get myself out of this situation. And that's what I did. So on New Year's Day, I had my cousin and my friend and her son. They came over to help me pack all of my stuff up. Anything I came into that marriage with, I left with. And she told me, she said, well, I'm not going to allow you to get on the road and drive until the sun comes up. And so I waited till the sun came up New Year's Day. I knew he was going to call me. He called, didn't ask me, what's going on? Where are you at? Where's all the stuff? He just asked me why I didn't leave him something to cook with in the oven. Because listen, I took everything. If I bought it and it came in that house with me, I took it with me. Did not care. It was mine. And I went and I drove back to Florida. Got back to Florida, got myself situated into a new doctor, um, everything. And I get this phone call one day from my aunt. She's yelling, turn the news on, turn the news on. I turn the news on. There's a story on the news where there is a homosexual couple. The older guy knowingly infected the younger guy with HIV, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison with a third-degree felony crime. And so my aunt said, well, this is what happened to you. Because at this point, my aunt knew, a couple other people knew, people knew I was back in town. And so um, I, I called the sheriff's office. I say, listen, I just saw this story on the news. This happened to me. What do I need to do? And at first, I didn't think that I could do anything because I was married. I felt like, okay, I'm married. They're not going to say nothing. They're going to say, well, you was married. You should have this. No, it was the complete opposite. So you didn't know before you got married? No, I didn't know. He didn't tell me. We even got tested. They took it very seriously. They had me to initialize it with a police report and a written statement. Once they got this information, they were able to investigate. I got a call on February 14th, Valentine's Day. My gift to him was him giving me and a detective the recorded confession that was going to close this case and him not be able to rebuttal anything. Because granted, at one point he started saying, well, how do I know she didn't give it to me? Well, clearly I didn't, but okay. So the detective called me and said, well, we need something that's going to be solid and stick. Do you give us permission to record your conversation with him? Absolutely. What questions would you like for me to answer?
So the detective basically said, we want to know when he was diagnosed. We want to know why he didn't tell you. We want to know X, Y, and Z. So I went ahead, wrote these questions down, got him on the phone on three way with the detective recording, and I said, so I need to go see a psychologist. This psychologist needs to know how to treat me. They're asking me these questions and I can't give them the answers because I don't know them. Whenever I ask you, you don't want to answer me. Now, because he wanted me to come home, he wanted to save this marriage, he wanted to do whatever he could to make sure that I didn't tell anybody and that I kept this to myself and that we just went on like nothing had ever happened. Um, he was willing to answer all these questions. So he went through, answered the questions. When I clicked him off, I said to the detective, I said, you got it? He said, oh, yeah, I got it. So at that point, with everything that they had, they were able to issue a nationwide warrant for his arrest. They issued a nationwide warrant for his arrest, and he was ultimately extradited from South Carolina, brought to Florida. His face was on the news in South Carolina, was on the news here in Florida. So people start seeing it. They start hearing the buzz. Now, this is including people that he had slept with and people who had slept with people who had slept with. So lots of people started seeing this, and there was a city-wide panic happening in the Greenville, Spartanburg area of South Carolina. And as well as with the place that he was working at, because at the time he was working at BMW Manufacturing in Greer, South Carolina. So yeah, he was there for 5 years. And so this was something that was huge for this area and for what was going on. And so he got into, with his lawyer, and he told his lawyer, well, how do we know that she didn't give it to me? Well, first of all, you already admitted not only in recording, but in the CDC's records and in the health department records, you were notified of your diagnosis August of 2002. I didn't initially meet him for the first time ever until September of 2003. So he knew a whole year prior to ever meeting me in life that he was HIV positive. So at that point, he had no choice but to go ahead and plead guilty. So he pled guilty. He was sentenced. And at his sentencing hearing, the judge asked me, had he told me prior to, all of this taking place, had he told me his status, would I have stayed or would I have left? I told the judge, I said, well, listen, I said, had he told me his status initially, I would have said, you know what? Let's go together to the doctor so that we both have an understanding of what needs to be done to protect me from contracting this virus. Now, I knew this information, but I didn't know how well educated he was on it. So that would have been my thought. You see what I'm saying? I would have said, let's make sure we both have this clear understanding. And so we can do that. And the judge looked at him and said, well, Why didn't you tell her? And his answer was, well, anybody I had ever told before her, they left me, they didn't stay, they didn't want to be with me. And the judge said, well, you didn't tell her. She still left you. She didn't stay. And now you're going to prison. So he was sentenced to that 5 years maximum in the state of Florida. He had already been in locked up for 6 months before the sentencing hearing, and then he was released 6 months early for good behavior. So he ultimately ended up serving only five 4 years in prison. He was released March 2012. He was released, and as of this year, he currently still resides in South Carolina. Now, I do get lots of questions and lots of things of people saying, well, why didn't you ask to see his test results when you guys sat in front of the doctor? Now, one thing I will say is it was trust. It was literally 100% me trusting the person who I was going to be marrying, who I was living with, who I was in a relationship with, who I was in love with. I trusted this person. And when you have that type of trust, your initial thought isn't that, okay, this person is lying to me, especially if they never gave you a reason to think that they would be lying. So that's why one of my biggest regrets, and probably the only regret I ever have in life, is not seeing that piece of paper with my own two eyes. Because throughout the investigation, when they were able to subpoena and talk to the doctor even told the detective that, hey, when she was in the room getting tested, I was in the room with him, let him know as my patient, I can't tell her your status because she's not on your medical clearance sheet for me to discuss your medical information with. But you need to tell her your status, or you don't need to marry her or be with her. She needs to know. And he assured the doctor that he was going to tell me. Well, hey, here we are 15 years later, and I was not told. And so, yeah. So he was told. A lot of people don't understand HIPAA laws and privacy acts. They think that, oh, the doctor should tell or can't tell. I mean, morally, if you look at it from an integrity and moral standpoint, yes, I feel like anybody who has information that could save someone's life or keep them from having to deal with something like this, I feel like they should tell it. But then you also have to look at people who take oaths. Police officers take oaths. EMTs and firefighters, they take oaths. Doctors and nurses and people who work in the medical field take oaths. So when this doctor took this oath, this doctor could not just blurt out and just tell me anything, okay? Unless I was given authorization to get this information. So that is where the dilemma always lies. And then people always say, well, his mom tried to tell you. And I always say, well, listen, I don't feel like his mom tried to tell me anything because she didn't just come out right and say it. Not only did she have the time that she brought it up when I put him and her face to face and she didn't open her mouth, but she had many opportunities prior to that one moment that she could have said to me. And come to find out, he told his mom I knew. Now, had his mom assumed that I knew, what she should have done is initiated the conversation with me with the understanding that I knew. She could have said, well, he told me that you knew that he was HIV positive. Are you sure you're okay with that? And at that moment, she would have knew I would have knew. She would have known that I didn't know anything the moment she would have asked that question or a question like that. But she didn't. And I believe the only thing that saved me from not contracting this virus prior to August 4th of 2007 was the fact that I never chose to have unprotected sex with him. Whenever we had sex, we always had sex with a condom. Our wedding night was the first night that we had unprotected sex. So why am I sharing my story with you guys and with whoever is going to listen? It's because I want people to understand that things like this happen. You don't have to be a drug user or a promiscuous man or woman out here just having sex. You can be someone who does everything the right way the first time. You can be someone who takes the initiative, who's married. A lot of people don't even realize that there are people who in the late 80s, early 90s did not find out that they were even diagnosed until they saw their spouse's death certificate and it said that they died from AIDS complications. This thing is real, and I want people to understand how real it is, and I want people to know that they need to go and get tested. They need to know their status. They need to know all this stuff. So what I plan on doing moving forward with this podcast is I plan on educating you guys. I plan on putting my voice out here, putting this information out here, so that even though I'm not going to be on here live, and I may, we don't know the day or the hour. I hate to, put it into a religious standpoint, but we don't. At any moment, we can be gone from this world. And so I want to be able to leave something behind that people can go back to, and they can get this information and this education, not just from somebody who went to school for it and who can read it to you out of a book, but someone who actually is walking in these footsteps and living this life as a person who was diagnosed with HIV, who has to wake up and go to bed every day taking medication that they really don't want to take. Someone who has to see a doctor every 2, 3, or 4 months. Someone who has to make sure that they're doing everything they need to do so that they can stay healthy. I want you guys to hear it from, as what they say, the horse's mouth, not just some third party and no he say, she said nothing. I want you to hear it from me and me alone. So that is why I'm taking this initiative right now to do this with and for you all. So please, you guys, make sure that you continue to share out this podcast to the masses. Make sure that you follow me on all my social media platforms. And if you have questions, reach out. Reach out. Ask questions. I know when someone hears this story for the first time, they're going to have lots of questions. Listen, I am an open book. No question goes left unanswered with me. So don't feel like you can't ask me a question. Please do. I encourage it. All right?
Hope you enjoyed today's show. Don't forget, you can visit my website, LadyByrdOfficial.com, for more information or to schedule a one-on-one session. Until next time, bye.